three brothers vanished without a trace in 1979, leaving behind a town shrouded in mystery. Then, 40 years later, a devastating farmhouse fire uncovered secrets that would change everything forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, tell me where you're watching from and drop a comment below. Let's connect before we begin. The wind that evening came in restless, cold waves, whispering through the brittle cornfields that stretched like golden seas around the Monroe family's remote Missouri farmhouse. The sky was the color of rust, a dimming twilight smothered in gray, the kind of sky that makes animals restless and mothers watch the clock. It was November 12th, 1979, and out on that lonely stretch of farmland, nestled between nowhere and almost forgotten, the Monroe boys were never seen again. Caleb, the eldest at 11, was the quiet, thoughtful one who always looked out for his younger brothers. Joey, 9, was all elbows and knees, a wild grin, and a pocket full of string and rocks. Tommy, the baby at just 6 years old, still spoke with the soft mispronunciations of childhood, always dragging behind but never left behind. That evening, just after supper, the three boys asked their mother if they could ride their bikes along the edge of the cornfield before bath time. Helen Monroe hesitated. Frank had been drinking again, and the sky looked stormy, but the boys were restless, and it was one of the last mild evenings before winter would set in. "Just 30 minutes, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "And don't go past the fence post." She watched them pedal off, their silhouettes swallowed by the corn, the crunch of gravel fading into the rustling hush of dry stalks. They never came back. By nightfall, when the house grew too quiet and Frank had passed out in his recliner, Helen's unease turned to dread. She stepped onto the porch, calling out into the growing dark. No laughter, no barking from their dog, Jasper, just wind. The cornfield, tall, dry, endless, stood like a silent wall. She grabbed a flashlight and ventured down the dirt path, her light bobbing across ruts and weeds, calling their names louder now. Caleb, Joey, Tommy. There was no answer but the chirring of crickets and the creak of the windmill. At the edge of the field, near the old scarecrow post, she found the bikes, 3 of them, tipped over, cold to the touch. Caleb's red one, Joey's with the rusted bell, and little Tommy's with the fraying streamers on the handlebars, all leaning against one another like they'd just been dropped mid-laugh. No sign of a struggle. No footprints, no scattered belongings, no tire marks in the dirt. Within the hour, the sheriff's truck rumbled down the gravel drive, headlights cutting through the gloom. The Monroes stood on their porch, Helen pale and rigid, Frank stumbling and slurring, trying to pull himself together. Flashlights and hounds searched the fields that night, and the next, and the next. Volunteers combed through barns, wells, culverts, and sheds. Helicopters scanned the woods to the west. Reporters came and went. Psychics sent letters. Theories multiplied. Some said a drifter had taken them. Others swore it was a ritual thing. Children don't just vanish in a thin air. The truth was no one knew. And in small towns like Oak Hollow, not knowing was almost worse than anything else. Weeks turned to months, and the fields were harvested, but the boys were never found. Every trace of them seemed to have been swallowed by the land itself. Helen sat at the kitchen table each morning with the boys' cereal bowls still set out, her eyes hollow. Frank stopped working the fields, then stopped speaking altogether, choosing instead to drink away the silence. In the spring, the sheriff's department quietly closed the investigation, leaving behind a thick folder of unanswered questions and a house steeped in shadows. The Monroe home, once filled with laughter and scraped knees, became a mausoleum. Birthday presents remained wrapped on the top shelf of Helen's closet. The school bus stopped coming by. The family dog eventually wandered off, never to return. Helen clung to the house with the kind of stubborn hope that breaks hearts. Every creak in the floor, every knock on the door, she believed could be them. She never let anyone change the boys' room, never moved their drawings off the fridge. Frank, meanwhile, became a ghost inside his own skin, collapsing into silence and drink, nursing guilt too great to name. In time, people stopped asking about the Monroe boys. Oak Hollow moved on, as small towns do. A tragedy, yes, but one that faded like yellowing newsprint tucked into a drawer. And so the farmhouse stood, peeling paint, sagging porch, weeds climbing the windowsills, while time marched on. The fields were rented out to neighbors. The mailbox rusted shut. Frank passed quietly in his sleep in 1998, his obituary a single paragraph with no mention of the boys. Helen remained, frail and whispering, until her own death in the early days of 2019. She died alone in her rocker, a faded photograph of Caleb, Joey, and Tommy clasped in her hands. 2 months later, on a windy spring night eerily similar to the one when the boys vanished, lightning struck an old elm on the Monroe property. The fire spread fast. The structure, dry as tinder after years of neglect, was engulfed before the fire trucks even crested the hill. Flames lit up the cornfield like a funeral pyre, and by morning, all that remained was smoldering wood, twisted nails, and 40 years' worth of sorrow reduced to ash. But amid the ruin, something was uncovered. Something the fire had exposed that decades of silence had not. Beneath the collapsed floorboards of the old cellar, among the burnt beams and blackened stone, a hole gave way. And in that hole, deep, dark, and cold, they found something that would turn the entire town upside down. Something that would finally begin to answer the question that had haunted Oak Hollow for 40 years. What happened to the Monroe boys? In the days that followed the fire, a strange unease settled over Oak Hollow like smoke that refused to lift. The Monroes' old farmhouse, long a silent relic of sorrow, now stood as a blackened shell, its charred timbers stretching skyward like the bones of something too long buried. Most assumed the blaze was just bad luck, an old building struck by lightning. But for the few who still remembered the case of the missing Monroe boys, the fire was more than that. It was a crack in the ground, a fissure through time, a quiet reckoning. And what it revealed was something that neither law nor time had managed to unearth in 4 long decades. Fire investigators were the first to spot it. A burned-out section near the rear of the house where the floor had collapsed into a dark void below. At first, it appeared to be a cellar, perhaps long forgotten, filled with collapsed beams and crumbling stone. But it was deeper than any root cellar had a right to be. Deeper and colder, like something dug with purpose. What made the hairs on the necks of seasoned firemen stand up wasn't the hole itself, but what was lying just beside it, half exposed by the fire, curled in the fetal position, the scorched remnants of fabric still clinging to bone. It was a child, and there were 3. The official report was cautious, clinical, wrapped in the kind of sterile language meant to contain panic. Human remains consistent with juvenile skeletal structures was how the coroner described it. But the town didn't need a report to know. They already knew. Oak Hollow held its breath as forensics confirmed what hearts already had. The Monroe boys, Caleb, Joey, and little Tommy, had never left that house. News spread like fire through dry grass. Reporters descended again after 40 years, their vans crowding the gravel shoulder just off County Road 6. Satellite dishes sprouted like weeds. Microphones hunted for anyone still alive who remembered. The town was too small to hide. For many, the revelation reopened wounds long scarred over. Some wept. Others whispered. Most simply stared at the ashes as if the house had finally spoken after a lifetime of silence. What could have happened in that house? Why hadn't they been found before? And, perhaps worst of all, how had Helen and Frank Monroe lived under the same roof, day in and day out, never knowing their boys were beneath them? For Sheriff Alan Pike, who had just been a rookie deputy in 1979, it was a haunting vindication. He'd never believed the boys had run off or been taken by strangers. Things like that don't just happen out here, he'd told his wife countless times over the years. He remembered the old house well, remembered standing on its porch, hat in hand, while Helen Monroe trembled and Frank refused to meet his eye. He remembered the way Frank had slurred his words that night, saying something about the boys always wandering too far. But nothing ever stuck. No evidence. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just those 3 bikes near the cornfield and a trail that ended cold. Now, as the remains were carefully unearthed and the soil sifted inch by forensic teams, a picture slowly began to emerge. The bones were found close together, huddled near a rotted wood beam, beneath what appeared to be a sealed trapdoor long hidden under the floorboards of the back pantry. That pantry had always been off-limits, according to old police records, a cluttered room filled with old flour sacks and canned peaches. Helen had kept it locked, said it was infested with mice, and nobody had reason to doubt her. But behind the shelves, under a false wall and beneath layers of dust and wood, there had been a hatch, a place someone didn't want found. The medical examiner worked quietly, carefully, knowing the town was watching. The remains were delicate, so many years in the earth, and yet still revealed enough to paint a grim tableau. 2 of the boys had likely died from blunt force trauma. The youngest, Tommy, showed signs of asphyxiation. No marks of restraint, no evidence of gunshots. But the cause of death was unmistakable: violence. Intentional, the kind that shattered more than bones. As this truth settled in, the spotlight turned sharply to the only 2 people who'd lived in that house after the boys disappeared: Helen and Frank Monroe. Frank was long buried, but Helen, who had died just 2 months before the fire, had left behind a journal, faded and brittle, found tucked beneath her mattress in the guest bedroom. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. It was more like a trail of whispers, fragments of thoughts, prayers scribbled in the margins, poems that read like apologies. There were entries dated years after the boys had vanished, some simply repeating their names, others cryptic. "I hear them still," she wrote once. "The house groans with the weight of what we buried." Another page bore the line, "Forgive what I allowed. Forgive what I feared." The journal cast shadows, but no certainty. Did Helen know all along? Had she helped cover up something? Protected someone? Or had she, like many suspected, been another victim in a house where silence reigned and fear grew roots? People remembered her eyes in the years after the boys disappeared. Hollow, distant, as though something inside her had turned to stone. No one could say if it was guilt or grief. As new questions poured in, one old truth remained. Someone had killed those boys, and they'd done it in a house their mother never left. Was it Frank, quick to rage and often drunk, hiding something darker than anyone imagined? Or was there someone else, someone no one ever thought to suspect, who had slipped through the cracks of memory and time? The farmhouse fire had unearthed more than bones. It had reignited a mystery that had never been solved, only buried. And now, 40 years too late, the search for truth had begun again. Not in fields or woods this time, but in memories long suppressed and secrets that refused to stay buried. The fire had peeled back layers of dust and time, revealing not just charred wood and forgotten memories, but a secret chamber beneath the old farmhouse floorboards, a space that for 40 years had hidden the darkest truth of Oak Hollow. As the forensic team pried open the trapdoor in the pantry, a cold, stale air escaped, carrying with it the weight of decades. Inside was a small, cramped cellar, barely large enough to hold a man standing, much less 3 boys. The walls were rough stone, cold to the touch, and the floor was covered in dirt and broken shards of old glass jars. It was here that the remains had been discovered, tucked away in a corner as if deliberately concealed. The discovery shook the entire community. How could this secret have been kept for so long? How had no one suspected? Detective Laura Bennett, newly assigned to the case, was a woman with a steady gaze and a mind honed on puzzles no one else wanted to solve. She had grown up hearing whispers about the Monroes, tales passed down like ghost stories among locals. But now, standing in the shadow of the burnt farmhouse, Laura knew this was no mere legend. This was a real horror, hidden in plain sight. She began to piece together the fragments: the trapdoor, the locked pantry, Helen's cryptic journal entries. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep the boys' final hours a secret. But who and why? The initial examination suggested the boys had been held captive in that small cellar, perhaps for days, maybe weeks. The cramped space offered no comfort, no light, no ventilation. Their bodies had shown signs of starvation and dehydration before the fatal injuries were inflicted. The brutality of it unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. Laura imagined the terror those young boys must have felt, trapped in darkness, desperate to escape but unable to break free. It was a nightmare that no child should endure. Yet the silence of the house, the quiet resignation of the family, had allowed this nightmare to remain hidden for decades. Neighbors came forward with memories long buried. Strange noises at night, sudden absences, the eerie quiet that fell over the farmhouse. One elderly woman, Mrs. Turner, recalled seeing Frank Monroe dragging heavy sacks into the cellar during the summer of '79, months before the disappearance. Another neighbor remembered Helen locking the pantry door, telling her children never to enter. But no one had dared pry deeper. Fear and suspicion had kept the town silent, the past sealed like the trapdoor under the floor. As Laura dug through old case files, she uncovered inconsistencies and unexplored leads. The original investigation had focused on external suspects, a drifter, a passing traveler, but the evidence now pointed inward toward the family itself. She found letters written by Helen in the months after the boys vanished. Pleas for forgiveness, hints of desperation. Yet no one ever confronted her directly. Helen's reputation as a grieving mother shielded her from scrutiny. The community was torn. Some wanted to believe Helen was a victim of circumstance, perhaps coerced or trapped by a husband whose violence grew unchecked. Others whispered darker theories, that the Monroes had harbored secrets darker than anyone dared admit. But with Helen gone and Frank buried, the truth was locked away with them, until now. In the weeks that followed, Laura uncovered a small box hidden beneath the floorboards near the trapdoor. Inside were faded photographs of the boys, their smiling faces frozen in time, alongside a folded note in Helen's shaky handwriting. The note spoke of fear and love, but also of silence and betrayal. It hinted at someone outside the family, a man who had been in the house the night the boys disappeared, a man who had demanded obedience and punished disobedience with cruelty, a man who had vanished as mysteriously as the boys themselves. This revelation sent shockwaves through Oak Hollow. A stranger? Someone with ties to the family? Laura knew the answers were buried deep, tangled in decades of pain and fear. But she also knew this was the break they had waited for. The fire had not only destroyed the farmhouse, but had ignited a search for justice long overdue. The bones beneath the floorboards spoke a silent truth, one that would finally unravel the mystery of the Monroe boys and reveal the darkness that had haunted Oak Hollow for 40 years. The faded note found beneath the floorboards was a thread pulling Detective Laura Bennett deeper into a dark and tangled web. The handwriting was Helen's, quivering, haunted, but the words hinted at a presence no one had named before. A stranger, a shadow lurking within the walls of the Monroe farmhouse. Someone whose face was unknown, but whose impact had been devastating. The idea sent chills through Laura. For decades, the community had wrapped their memories around Frank Monroe's temper, Helen's silence, and the boy's disappearance as a tragic mystery with no culprit. But now, there was a new suspect, an unknown figure who had come and gone, unseen but deeply felt. Laura revisited old interviews, transcripts yellowed and brittle with age. She sought out surviving neighbors, friends of the family, anyone who might recall a strange visitor in '79. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Several people remembered a man, unremarkable yet unsettling, who had appeared in town sporadically in the late '70s. He was tall, thin, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through you. Nobody knew his name, and when asked, many dismissed him as a drifter or a traveling worker. But a few remembered him lingering near the Monroe property, especially on the night the boys vanished. This man, as stories pieced together, had a connection to Frank Monroe's past, a past few had dared to explore. Rumors whispered about debts paid not with money but with silence. Helen's note spoke vaguely of threats and fear, of promises made in the dark to keep secrets locked away. Laura realized that this stranger was more than a visitor. He was a key to understanding what had truly happened in that house. But uncovering his identity meant reopening wounds the town had fought hard to bury. The community's reaction was mixed. Some welcomed the new investigation, hungry for closure after decades of unanswered questions. Others feared it, dreading the exposure of sins long hidden. For the Monroe family, now fractured and distant, it was a painful reminder of a past they had tried to forget. Helen's surviving sister, Margaret, hesitated to speak but eventually revealed a long-held family secret. Frank had once been involved in shady dealings, associating with men whose intentions were far from innocent. Could this stranger have been one of them? A man with a score to settle? Laura's pursuit of the truth led her to dusty court records and old police blotters, documents that had been overlooked or intentionally ignored. She uncovered a name, Samuel "Sam" Granger, a drifter with a history of violence and threats in neighboring counties. Witnesses placed him near Oak Hollow at the time, and a pattern of intimidation and fear surrounded his movements. Sam Granger was a man who vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving destruction in his wake. The detective's heart ached as she imagined the Monroe boys trapped in the cellar, their captor lurking just beyond the door. The thought of a man like Sam Granger wielding power over a family, enforcing silence through terror, was horrifying but seemed all too plausible. Helen's journal and a newly found note painted a portrait of a woman caught between love and fear, forced into complicity by threats she dared not defy. Laura knew the road ahead would be difficult. Without Sam Granger to confront, and with memories fading in the minds of witnesses, the pieces might never fully fit together. Yet, the fire had given them a start, a glimpse behind the curtain of time. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, no longer content to be buried beneath the ashes. Oak Hollow was waking from a long nightmare, and as the stranger in the shadows became clearer, so did the hope for justice and healing. The discovery of the note beneath the floorboards was only the beginning. Laura Bennett's instincts told her there was more to find, more truths concealed within the decaying walls of the Monroe farmhouse. Her suspicion was confirmed when one of the fire investigators mentioned a partially burned box recovered from the ashes near the cellar entrance. Inside, wrapped in brittle, soot-stained cloth, was a weathered leather-bound journal. The edges were singed, the pages warped by heat, but the handwriting inside was unmistakably Helen's, precise, frantic, full of despair and desperate hope. Laura felt the weight of history in her hands, as if the journal itself carried the voice of a woman who had suffered too long in silence. As she carefully turned the fragile pages, the journal revealed a side of Helen Monroe few had ever known. Between the lines of everyday life, the mundane descriptions of meals, children, and chores, were hidden confessions of fear and entrapment. Helen wrote of an unyielding darkness that had settled over the family after Frank's temper worsened. But more chilling was the frequent mention of the stranger, Sam Granger, whose visits were marked by threats and violence. Helen described him as a man who demanded obedience, who punished dissent with cruel precision, a presence that suffocated the household like a shadow with no end. The journal detailed the days leading up to the boy's disappearance with harrowing clarity. Helen's words described nights filled with whispered prayers and secret meetings, frantic attempts to protect her children from the violent men who controlled their lives. She wrote of locking the boys in the cellar not as a punishment, but as a desperate measure to keep them safe from something worse. Her guilt was palpable. She blamed herself for the boys' fate, trapped between a husband's rage and a stranger's cruelty, powerless to save them. Laura's heart ached as she read the passages describing the final night before the disappearance. Helen's words were fragmented, confused, fear overshadowing her usual careful script. She hinted at a confrontation, a breaking point where Frank and Sam clashed violently. The last entry was a plea, a hope that the boys would somehow survive the night, that the nightmare would end. But history had proven otherwise. The journal was a tragic testament to a family torn apart by secrets and fear, a cry for help that had gone unheard for 4 decades. The journal also contained sketches, rudimentary drawings of the farmhouse layout, the cellar, and notes about hidden compartments. Helen's desperate attempts to create a plan, a map that might one day reveal the truth to someone who cared enough to look. It was as if she had known that time was running out, that her story might one day be uncovered, and she needed to leave a trail for those who followed. Laura knew this journal was more than just a record. It was a key to unlocking the past, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded behind closed doors. With the journal as her guide, Laura began to piece together new leads. She located family friends who had visited the farmhouse, neighbors who had noticed unusual activity but had been too afraid to speak out. Each account, each memory, added depth to the story of a household living under constant threat. The community's silence was no longer ignorance, but fear instilled by Sam Granger and upheld by Frank Monroe's brutal control. As the days passed, Laura also uncovered letters hidden within the journal's pages, letters Helen had written but never sent. Some were addressed to social workers, others to distant relatives, begging for help or protection. None had reached their recipients, lost to time and circumstance. These lost letters underscored Helen's isolation and despair, trapped in a web of violence with no escape. The revelation of the journal ignited renewed interest in the cold case. Old wounds reopened, but so did hopes for healing. For the first time in 40 years, the voices of the Monroe boys were heard, not through whispers or rumors, but through the words of their mother, etched in ink and pain. The community, once bound by silence, began to acknowledge the truth, and Detective Laura Bennett, holding Helen's journal close, knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey toward justice. The unveiling of Helen Monroe's journal sent ripples through the quiet town of Oak Hollow, stirring memories long suppressed and voices long silenced. For years, the townspeople had carried the weight of the Monroe tragedy with a mixture of sorrow, guilt, and uneasy silence. Now, confronted with the raw, unfiltered words of a mother's torment, the community faced a reckoning it could no longer avoid. At the local church, during a gathering to honor the memory of the Monroe boys, familiar faces showed up, neighbors, former friends, even some who had once turned away. The air was thick with emotion, heavy with years of unspoken regret and unresolved questions. Laura Bennett found herself at the center of this unfolding storm. She had expected resistance, but the depth of denial surprised her. Many residents feared that reopening old wounds might taint the town's reputation, yet others saw it as a long-overdue chance for healing. Small groups began to share stories in hushed tones, snippets of conversations once overheard, glances exchanged in fear, warnings whispered to stay silent. The town's collective memory was fracturing and reassembling, shaped anew by Helen's haunting testimony. Among the voices emerging was Margaret, Helen's surviving sister, whose quiet strength became a beacon for many. She spoke openly of the family's struggles, of the heavy burden of secrets carried for decades. Her words resonated deeply, breaking the last vestiges of denial. Margaret revealed how Frank Monroe's temper had driven a wedge through their family, how the menacing presence of Sam Granger had paralyzed them with fear. Her courage inspired others to step forward, revealing pieces of the past that had been buried beneath layers of fear and shame. As stories multiplied, Laura uncovered troubling accounts of the town's complacency. Some residents admitted to knowing about the violence, but choosing silence to avoid confrontation or because they feared retaliation. Others confessed to suspecting but dismissing the boys' disappearance as an unfortunate but isolated tragedy. The reckoning was not just about the Monroe family. It was about a community grappling with its own failures, its role in allowing cruelty to thrive in the shadows. This collective reflection was painful but necessary, a step toward accountability and redemption. The town council convened emergency meetings to discuss how to support the ongoing investigation and the families affected. Proposals for community healing initiatives surfaced, memorials for the missing boys, counseling programs for residents haunted by the past, and educational efforts to prevent such tragedies in the future. Laura attended these meetings, aware that justice extended beyond solving a crime. It involved restoring trust and rebuilding the social fabric torn apart by years of fear and silence. Meanwhile, media attention intensified, drawing journalists and true crime enthusiasts to Oak Hollow. Some locals bristled at the scrutiny, worried that sensationalism might overshadow the solemnity of the tragedy. Yet, many recognized the importance of telling the story fully and truthfully. The renewed focus brought new witnesses forward, some reluctant, some eager to finally speak their truth. With each revelation, the community inched closer to uncovering what had truly happened in that farmhouse so long ago. Through it all, Laura remained steadfast, balancing her duty as a detective with empathy for the town's pain. She understood that the investigation was more than a search for facts. It was a journey through grief, fear, and hope. The journal had opened a door, but the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. The shadows cast by decades of silence were long, and the truth, though emerging, demanded patience and perseverance. In this town's reckoning, the past was no longer a distant memory, but a living presence demanding acknowledgement. For Oak Hollow, the road to healing had begun, paved by courage, confession, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. And as the community faced its reflection, Laura knew that the story of the Monroe boys was finally being told, not just as a mystery, but as a testament to resilience and the enduring power of truth. The charred remains of the Monroe farmhouse had long been a silent witness to the unspeakable secrets it harbored beneath its floorboards. But it wasn't until the fire that those secrets began to breathe again. As investigators combed through the ashes, their attention returned to the old cellar, the very place Helen Monroe had described in her journal as both a refuge and a prison. The cellar, buried under layers of debris and soot, was thought to be empty after the decades of abandonment, but Laura's determination led her to press for a thorough search. What they uncovered would shake Oak Hollow to its core and finally bring light to a darkness that had lingered for far too long. The cellar was small and damp, the air thick with the smell of smoke and mildew. With painstaking care, forensic teams sifted through the rubble, using specialized tools to detect hidden compartments. It was a slow, meticulous process, but then, deep within a false wall constructed from old bricks and rotted wood, they found a small, rusted metal box sealed tight against the ravages of time and fire. The box, when pried open, revealed an assortment of items: worn photographs, tattered clothes, and most haunting of all, a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Laura held the photographs with trembling hands. They depicted 3 young boys. Her heart recognized them instantly as the missing Monroe brothers, smiling, playing, frozen moments of innocence stolen away by cruel fate. But what caught her breath was a final image, a faded snapshot of the boys with a man whose face was obscured by shadows, but whose posture exuded menace. This figure, Laura realized, must have been the elusive Sam Granger, the man Helen feared most. The photo confirmed what the journal had hinted at. The boys had been in the company of someone sinister before their disappearance. The letters told a harrowing story. Written by Helen in the weeks before the boys vanished, they were addressed to authorities, family, and friends, pleas for rescue and protection. Some letters spoke of secret plans to escape, of coded messages hidden in everyday objects, and of a desperate hope that someone would listen and intervene. Other letters, however, contained cryptic warnings about trust and betrayal, a mother's fear that the danger was closer than anyone realized. These writings exposed a family caught in a tightening noose, with walls closing in from all sides. The discovery of these items in the cellar provided the breakthrough Laura had been seeking. It was clear that the boys had been confined there, hidden away to protect them, or perhaps to hide them from the world. The cellar had been both a sanctuary and a prison, a paradox that underscored the complexity of the Monroe tragedy. Laura's mind raced as she considered the implications. Had the boys been alive longer than anyone suspected? Had there been attempts to free them, thwarted by fear or violence? Each question deepened the mystery, yet every piece of evidence was a step closer to unveiling the truth. Local historians and structural experts were brought in to map the farmhouse's layout in detail, hoping to uncover any further concealed spaces or escape routes. The discovery of the false wall and hidden box was just the beginning. Whispers grew of other secret compartments, tunnels, or hidden rooms that might hold clues. The farmhouse, once a symbol of family and home, was now a labyrinth of pain and secrecy, its very walls bearing the scars of years of suffering. As news of the cellar's secret spread, the community's mood shifted. The buried past was no longer just a story in old journals. It was tangible, real, and present. The villagers, many of whom had grown up alongside the Monroe children, now grappled with the fact that they had lived beside a tragedy hidden in plain sight. For Laura, this moment was bittersweet. The evidence was tangible, but the cost of uncovering it was the reopening of wounds that many hoped had healed. Yet healing could only begin once truth was fully acknowledged. The old cellar's secret was a crucial piece of the puzzle, a silent testament to the Monroe family's ordeal. Laura felt the weight of responsibility to honor that truth and ensure the story of the three boys was told with the respect and dignity it deserved. The fire had destroyed the house, but it had also freed the past from its prison, igniting a quest for justice that would not rest until every secret was uncovered. The discovery of the cellar's hidden cache stirred not only the town's memories, but also summoned long-suppressed voices from the shadows. Among them was a stranger, a man whose sudden appearance would change the course of the investigation and reopen the wounds that Oak Hollow had tried so hard to bury. One chilly autumn evening, as Laura Bennett reviewed the newly unearthed evidence in her modest office, the door creaked open to reveal a tall, gaunt figure whose eyes held both weariness and determination. His name was Thomas Reed, a drifter who claimed to have known the Monroe boys, and what he was about to confess would send shockwaves through the community. Thomas's voice was low and steady as he recounted the events of that fateful summer night in 1979. He spoke of seeing the boys near the edge of the woods, frightened and desperate, trying to escape from the farmhouse's shadow. According to him, they had been held against their will, caught in a web of fear and violence spun by Frank Monroe and his closest accomplices. Thomas revealed that he had tried to help, offering shelter and guidance, but threats from Sam Granger and others had forced him into silence for decades. His confession was laced with remorse. He carried the burden of guilt for not speaking out sooner, a weight that had haunted him through years of wandering. Laura listened intently, sensing the gravity of his testimony, but also the fragile line between truth and memory. Thomas's story filled many gaps in the puzzle: the boys' attempted escapes, the threats they faced from within their own home, and the brutal grip of those who sought to control and silence them. Yet his account also raised new questions. How had he come forward after so long? What had finally compelled him to break the silence? These questions lingered as Laura delved deeper into his past, seeking corroboration for his claims. The town's reaction to Thomas's confession was mixed. Some greeted his arrival with suspicion, doubting the sincerity of a man who had remained hidden for so many years. Others saw in him a symbol of courage, a voice finally breaking through the walls of fear. For the Monroe family, especially Helen's surviving sister Margaret, his words were both painful and vital. They confirmed what they had long suspected but feared to acknowledge openly: that the boys had been trapped in a nightmare orchestrated by those they trusted most. Local law enforcement reopened old case files, cross-referencing Thomas's statements with archived police reports and witness testimonies. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged, a network of complicity and silence that had allowed the tragedy to fester in the shadows. The confession sparked renewed efforts to identify and hold accountable those responsible, even if the passage of time made justice more complicated. Laura faced the challenge of balancing the demands of the law with the fragile emotions of a community still grappling with its scars. Meanwhile, the media descended on Oak Hollow with renewed vigor, eager to capture the drama of a story thought to be closed but now unfolding in unexpected ways. Laura found herself navigating a delicate dance, protecting the privacy of the families while managing the public's insatiable curiosity. Thomas's confession became a focal point, drawing attention to the human cost of silence and the enduring power of truth. The town, once quiet and resigned, was now alive with the energy of reckoning and revelation. As days turned into weeks, Thomas's courage inspired others to come forward. Neighbors who had once remained silent began sharing what they knew or suspected, piecing together fragments of a past that had been carefully concealed. The collective memory of Oak Hollow was awakening, and with it, a determination to honor the Monroe boys by uncovering every truth. Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose, aware that this stranger's confession had opened a door that could never be closed again. In this pivotal moment, the story of the three brothers was no longer just about loss, but about resilience, justice, and the power of voices long silenced finally being heard. Oak Hollow was changing, and so was the legacy of the Monroe family, etched forever in the hearts of those who refused to forget. The farmhouse fire had unearthed many secrets, but none more haunting than the discovery of a hidden letter tucked away in the lining of an old trunk found beneath the rubble. It was fragile and yellowed with age, written in Helen Monroe's familiar hand, and addressed simply to whomever finds this. Laura Bennett held the letter delicately, feeling the weight of decades of pain and hope compressed into those fragile pages. The letter revealed a side of Helen's story the world had never known, a message filled with desperate love, hidden truths, and a plea for justice that could change everything. Helen's words painted a vivid picture of the days leading up to the disappearance of her three sons. She wrote of the growing fear within the walls of the farmhouse, the oppressive atmosphere that had taken hold as Frank Monroe's temper worsened, and the dark presence of Sam Granger that lurked just beyond the family's fragile peace. The letter spoke of Helen's secret attempts to protect her boys, her clandestine meetings with trusted neighbors, and coded plans to get the children to safety. It was a mother's heart laid bare, a testament to her courage and the unbearable burden she carried alone. As Laura read, she realized this letter was a roadmap, a key to understanding what had truly happened. Helen detailed hidden passages in the house, places where the boys might have been taken or hidden during those terrifying weeks. She named names, including those who had turned a blind eye and those who had tried to help but were silenced by fear. The letter was raw and unfiltered, a cry for justice wrapped in hope that someday someone would find it and act. For Laura, this was not just evidence. It was a lifeline thrown across time. The discovery electrified the investigation. Helen's letter provided not only emotional depth, but crucial leads that reignited the search for the truth. Laura and the local sheriff pored over the letter, cross-referencing the names and locations mentioned. They revisited old witnesses, now elderly and hesitant, hoping to unlock memories long buried. The letter's coded references to secret rooms and hidden keys became a treasure map leading deeper into the mystery. It was as if Helen's spirit was guiding them, urging justice to prevail after decades of silence. Yet, the letter also revealed a darker reality, the complicity of some community members who had chosen silence over intervention, allowing the tragedy to unfold unchecked. This revelation shook the town to its core. Many residents who had once closed their eyes to rumors now faced uncomfortable truths about their neighbors, friends, and even family. The fracture lines in Oak Hollow's peaceful facade became visible, exposing the long-lasting impact of fear and denial. Laura understood that this letter was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a catalyst for healing. It forced the community to confront its collective past and to choose whether to seek forgiveness and reconciliation or remain trapped in blame and resentment. She felt the immense responsibility to handle the letter with care, to honor Helen's voice, and to ensure that her message reached beyond the walls of Oak Hollow. As the investigation deepened, Laura found herself drawn closer to the Monroe family's remaining members, especially Margaret, Helen's sister. Together, they sifted through memories and mementos, piecing together fragments of a shattered history. The letter became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could endure, carried on the fragile wings of a mother's love. In the quiet moments between the rush of discoveries, Laura often thought of Helen Monroe and the sacrifices she made. The hidden letter was a bridge connecting past and present, grief and hope, silence and truth. It reminded everyone that no matter how long the night, the dawn would come. And for the three brothers who vanished so long ago, that dawn was finally breaking. The quiet streets of Oak Hollow seemed different now, as if the past had seeped through the cracks in the pavement and settled in the hearts of its residents. The discovery of Helen Monroe's letter and Thomas Reed's confession had pulled back a veil that had long obscured the truth, and the town was forced to confront shadows it had tried desperately to forget. For Laura Bennett, the investigation had become deeply personal. Each new revelation a step closer to uncovering not only what happened to the three brothers, but also why so many had chosen silence over justice. Yet the hardest part lay ahead, facing those still alive who held the answers and the pain. Laura arranged a series of private meetings with key figures connected to the Monroe family and the old farmhouse, including Sam Granger, who was now an aged and fragile man living in a nursing home on the town's outskirts. The weight of history hung heavy in the sterile rooms where these conversations took place, and Laura approached each meeting with a mix of empathy and determination. Sam's eyes, once sharp and commanding, now flickered with confusion and regret. At times, he denied any wrongdoing, but beneath his surface, Laura sensed the guilt that decades of silence had etched into his soul. The conversations with Sam and others revealed a complicated tapestry of fear, loyalty, and broken trust. Some had been too afraid to speak out, trapped by threats or the unspoken rules of their small town. Others had believed that ignoring the truth would protect them all. Laura found herself navigating this fragile web, balancing the need for justice with the reality that many involved were now elderly, burdened by their own regrets. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred in unexpected ways, and the community's collective memory began to shift from judgment to understanding. Margaret Monroe, Helen's sister, became Laura's closest ally in this journey. Together, they sifted through old photographs, letters, and town records, uncovering hidden connections and painful betrayals. Margaret's resilience and quiet strength inspired Laura, reminding her that this investigation was more than a cold case. It was a human story about loss, courage, and the quest for healing. Their bond grew stronger as they shared stories, tears, and the hope that after all these years, the truth could finally set them free. The town meetings, once hesitant and tense, gradually opened into forums for dialogue and reconciliation. Oak Hollow's residents began to acknowledge their shared history, confronting the painful legacy of silence that had allowed injustice to fester. Laura watched as the community slowly transformed, its people learning to listen to one another's stories, to forgive, and to remember. The process was neither easy nor quick, but it was necessary. In these moments, Laura saw the power of truth, not only to uncover the past, but to mend the wounds it left behind. Amidst this healing, new evidence surfaced, small but significant clues that pointed to the final whereabouts of the three brothers. A faded map hidden in Helen's letter, combined with testimonies from those who had come forward, guided Laura and a local sheriff to a secluded area of the woods near the farmhouse. There, hidden beneath layers of earth and time, lay the remains of a small shelter, a place where the boys had sought refuge in their last desperate days. The discovery was both heartbreaking and hopeful, a tangible link to the truth that had eluded the town for decades. For Laura, the moment was bittersweet. It brought closure, but also renewed grief. She understood that the journey was not just about solving a mystery, but honoring the lives that had been lost and the families forever changed. The confrontation with the past had exposed painful truths, but also ignited a path forward, one of remembrance, justice, and community healing. As the sun set over Oak Hollow, Laura felt a profound sense of purpose. The story of the three brothers was finally being told in full, and with it came the possibility of peace. The revelation of the boys' final refuge and the painful truths uncovered ignited a profound transformation within Oak Hollow. Once a town weighed down by silence and suspicion, it now embraced a slow but sincere awakening, a collective reckoning with its past that touched every corner of the community. For decades, the town had been haunted by the disappearance of the Monroe boys, but the uncovering of their story stirred a powerful wave of empathy, reflection, and a desire for change. Laura Bennett found herself at the heart of this renewal, guiding the town through the murky waters of memory and forgiveness. At town meetings, community members spoke with newfound honesty, their voices trembling with emotion but filled with hope. Old neighbors who had never spoken to one another since the disappearance now shared stories, offering perspectives long buried. Local leaders proposed initiatives to support families affected by loss and trauma, aiming to prevent future tragedies. The school organized commemorations for the Monroe boys, and the townspeople rallied around Helen's family, whose bravery had sparked this healing. The transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it perfect, but the seed of change had been planted firmly in the soil of Oak Hollow. Laura watched the subtle shifts with a mixture of relief and pride. The path had been arduous, marked by painful confrontations and difficult truths, but it was also illuminated by kindness and resilience. The once fractured community was beginning to stitch itself back together, learning to face the past with compassion instead of fear. Laura's work extended beyond investigation. She became a bridge between generations, helping the town reclaim its shared history and identity. The story of the three brothers, once a dark secret, now served as a catalyst for growth and understanding. For the Monroe family, the town's transformation brought a measure of solace. Margaret, Helen's sister, found comfort in the community's embrace, while Laura ensured that the boys' memory was honored in a way that reflected their lives and the love that surrounded them. Memorials were planned, and a foundation was established in their names to assist families coping with disappearance and loss. These acts of remembrance provided a tangible way for Oak Hollow to acknowledge its past while looking forward. The pain was still present, but it was woven into a larger tapestry of healing and hope. Amid these changes, Laura also faced her own personal reflections. The investigation had profoundly affected her, reshaping her understanding of justice, community, and the power of truth. She realized that uncovering the past was never just about facts. It was about human stories, connections, and the courage to confront uncomfortable realities. Laura felt gratitude for the people who had shared their memories and for the strength she had witnessed in Oak Hollow. The journey was far from over, but the town was no longer defined by loss alone. It was becoming a place of remembrance and renewal. As autumn deepened, casting golden light over the hills surrounding Oak Hollow, the town prepared to gather for a memorial service. It was a solemn occasion, but also a celebration of life, resilience, and the enduring bonds of family and community. Laura stood among the crowd, feeling the weight of decades lift slightly with every shared memory and tear. The three brothers, whose disappearance had once torn the town apart, were now at the center of a story that united its people in empathy and resolve. Oak Hollow was changing, and with it, the promise of a future shaped by understanding and hope. The day of the memorial service arrived with a quiet solemnity that settled over Oak Hollow like a gentle embrace. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke, blending with the weight of grief and hope that lingered in every heart. Families gathered near the rebuilt farmhouse site, where a simple monument now stood, a tribute to the three brothers who had vanished so many years ago. Laura Bennett stood among them, feeling the gravity of the moment. This was more than a ceremony. It was a turning point, a collective healing for a town that had lived in shadow for too long. Voices trembled as friends, neighbors, and strangers alike shared memories, fragments of laughter, moments of kindness, and the aching silence left behind by the boys' disappearance. Margaret Monroe's voice, steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes, reminded everyone of the courage it took to seek the truth. As she spoke, the crowd listened, united by a profound understanding that healing was not forgetting, but remembering with compassion. The memorial became a space where pain could be acknowledged openly, where the wounds of the past might begin to mend through shared sorrow and solidarity. In the weeks following the service, Laura worked closely with local counselors and support groups to provide ongoing assistance to those still grappling with loss. She understood that healing was a fragile process, one that demanded patience and kindness. The community responded with warmth and resilience, coming together to rebuild trust and strengthen the bonds that had once been frayed. Schools incorporated lessons about empathy and history, while town leaders championed initiatives focused on mental health and prevention. Oak Hollow was slowly transforming its identity, embracing a future where openness and support replaced silence and fear. Yet beneath the surface of progress, Laura knew some wounds ran deep, hidden in quiet corners of the town and in the hearts of those who remained reluctant to confront their past. She continued her conversations with longtime residents, gently encouraging truth-telling and reconciliation. Sometimes, the process revealed unexpected acts of kindness, while other times it unearthed bitter regrets. The journey toward healing was uneven, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs, but the collective willingness to face these challenges became the foundation for lasting change. Laura saw that healing was not a destination, but a continuous act of courage and compassion. The Monroe family, having endured decades of uncertainty, found moments of peace in these changing tides. Helen's name was spoken aloud with reverence and love, her bravery in seeking justice a beacon for the community. Margaret embraced the healing process, drawing strength from newfound friendships and the knowledge that her nephew's story would never again be forgotten. Laura witnessed the power of this transformation firsthand, how the act of remembering, of honoring the past, could ignite hope and resilience even in the face of profound loss. It was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and heal. As autumn gave way to winter, Oak Hollow prepared for quieter days ahead, its streets imbued with a renewed sense of connection and purpose. The scars of the past remained visible, but they no longer defined the town's story. Instead, they stood as reminders of the strength found in truth and community. Laura, reflecting on the journey she had led, felt a deep gratitude for the courage of those who had come forward, the families who had persevered, and the town that was learning to heal. The story of the three brothers had reached its turning point, transforming pain into a legacy of hope and renewal. The legacy of the Monroe brothers had begun to take root in ways no one had anticipated. What started as a tragic mystery had blossomed into a powerful story of resilience, community, and the enduring bonds of family. As the years passed following the farmhouse fire and the truth it unveiled, the brothers' memory became a living testament, woven into the fabric of Oak Hollow's identity. Schools named scholarships in their honor. Local artists created murals depicting their lives, and stories of their courage inspired generations to come. Their legacy was no longer defined by absence, but by the strength they left behind. Laura Bennett, having dedicated herself to uncovering the truth, now found her role evolving. She became a mentor and advocate, speaking at events about the importance of remembering those who are lost and supporting families left behind. Her investigation had sparked a community-wide dialogue on how to prevent similar tragedies and how to nurture healing when loss occurs. The lessons learned from the Monroe case influenced policies and programs beyond Oak Hollow, reaching neighboring towns and even state lawmakers. It was a legacy of hope born from sorrow, a beacon for those seeking justice and peace. Helen's family embraced this legacy with both pride and tenderness. Margaret, now an active figure in community affairs, often spoke about her nephews with a blend of sorrow and gratitude. The pain of their disappearance never fully faded, but it was tempered by the knowledge that their story had changed lives. The foundation created in their names provided resources to families facing the unthinkable, offering counseling, legal aid, and support networks. Through this work, the brothers' spirit lived on, offering comfort and strength to those navigating their own dark nights of the soul. It was a legacy built on love, courage, and remembrance. The town itself transformed alongside the legacy. Oak Hollow became known as a place of resilience and compassion, a community that had faced its darkest moments with honesty and grace. Visitors came to see the memorials, to hear the story that had captured hearts, and to witness a town reborn from tragedy. Local businesses thrived as residents, old and new, contributed to a revitalized spirit of hope. The once silent streets now echoed with laughter, music, and a lively hum of a community determined to honor its past while embracing the future. The Monroe brothers had become a symbol not just of loss, but of collective strength. For Laura, the legacy of the brothers was deeply personal. Her journey from investigator to advocate had changed her life in profound ways. She often thought back to that first day in the farmhouse ruins, to the haunting silence and the glimmers of truth that had slowly emerged. The experience had taught her about the fragility of life, the power of memory, and the importance of never giving up. She carried the brothers' story with her, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there can be light. And through her work, she hoped that light would continue to shine for others who needed it most. As the years rolled on, Oak Hollow celebrated the Monroe brothers each autumn, the season when their story had begun to unfold. The memorial service became an annual event, drawing people from near and far who wanted to pay their respects and remember the boys whose lives had touched so many. The town had found peace, not by forgetting, but by embracing the past with open hearts. The legacy of the three brothers endured, a powerful testament to the enduring bonds of family, community, and hope that even time cannot erase. As the years gently turned, Oak Hollow slowly emerged from the long shadow cast by the disappearance of the Monroe brothers. The scars left behind had softened with time, yet the memory of those three boys remained vivid in every corner of the town. It was a memory now no longer marked by mystery or fear, but by hope, healing, and a renewed sense of purpose. The farmhouse, once the site of tragedy, had been transformed into a community center, a symbol of renewal where families gathered to celebrate life and support one another. This place of healing was a tangible reminder that even the deepest wounds could give way to new beginnings. Laura Bennett stood by the window of the center one crisp morning, watching children play in the yard where the boys had once run free. The laughter that filled the air was a melody of life reclaiming space, a testament to resilience that had carried the town through decades of grief. She thought back to the day the fire revealed the truth, a day that changed everything, that turned pain into purpose. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with heartbreak and hope, but standing here now, Laura felt a profound peace. The story of the Monroe brothers was no longer just a chapter of loss. It was a living legacy inspiring others to find strength in their own struggles. The families of Oak Hollow, especially the Monroe family, had come together in a bond forged by shared sorrow and healing. Margaret's eyes still glistened with tears when she spoke of her nephews, but there was a smile too, one born from knowing that their story had changed the world around them. The community's commitment to remembering had fostered a culture of care where no family would face loss alone. Support groups flourished, children learned the value of empathy, and town leaders remained vigilant, dedicated to protecting the vulnerable. The brothers' disappearance had become a catalyst for positive change, a painful past transformed into a hopeful future. In the quiet moments, Laura reflected on the power of truth, the courage it took to uncover it, the healing it could bring. The farmhouse fire had burned away years of silence, exposing the darkest secrets, but also igniting a light that could never be extinguished. Through tears and tenacity, the people of Oak Hollow had reclaimed their story, rewriting it with strength and compassion. And as the sun set on another day in the town, Laura knew that the legacy of the three brothers would continue to live on, not just in memory, but in every act of kindness, every hand extended in support, every voice raised against injustice. This was a new beginning, not only for Oak Hollow, but for all who had been touched by the story of the Monroe brothers. It was a reminder that even in the darkest nights, dawn would come, bringing with it the promise of hope and renewal. The past was honored, the present embraced, and the future held with open hearts. And as Laura watched the children chase one another beneath the wide American sky, she felt certain that the spirit of the brothers, Tommy, James, and Michael, would forever be woven into the tapestry of this town, a living testament to the enduring power of love, truth, and healing. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the story of the Monroe brothers, a tale of loss, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family and community. Your time and attention mean the world, and I hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it did mine. If you found this video meaningful, please consider subscribing to the channel so we can share many more stories together. Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below, whether it's your thoughts, feelings, or even your own story you'd like to share. I'd love to hear from you and build a community where every voice matters. Until next time, take care and remember, every story has the power to heal and inspire.